rotating seat on the UN Security Council, and people, I don't know if it was Roger, but people like Roger and his ilk were saying, don't you see how incompetent the Bush administration is? They can't get diplomacy right. Well, what are we doing now? We're sort of begging that the Turks or the Brazilians, who are now rotating members of the Security Council, sign on for another round of resolutions, which they show no interest in doing. Now, God forbid we should ever break off relations with Brazil. Their people are much too beautiful. And
why does this same rule not apply in Iran, then?
Because actually Brazil is not Iran, and I'm sure you know the difference.
Well, on the beauty stakes, anyway.
That's
another matter.
Gentlemen. Okay, are you finished with your response or not quite?
I think this is
okay. We'll
veer.
We've been up here a long time.
Okay,
Our minds are beginning to wander.
Okay. Let me. Thank you, gentlemen. This is not what we were expecting. Please continue to feed your questions in. We are getting a number of questions from our global webcast at hjc.org, and thank you for those in the audience who have been feeding their questions in as well. I think that I will take, there's a question here from a viewer, Saeed Asef. How do the policies advanced by either debater advance the cause of democracy in Iran? What is your prescription for advancing democracy in Iran? Bret, let's start with you.
First of all, full-throated support by the Obama administration for the people who are bravely demonstrating, risking their lives, having themselves or their children thrown into prison. Not what President Obama has done, which was to hem and haw for a week as the Nettas were murdered, and then say, well, gee, we really don't want to interfere in your internal affairs, but this kind of makes us uncomfortable. That is the beginning. You know, when you look at successful resistance movements, freedom movements, you look at what happened in South Africa, you look at what happened in Poland, you find that the moral support that was provided by the West turns out to be crucial to the people who most needed it. There's a wonderful, Natan Sharansky describes a wonderful moment where he's in the Gulag somewhere, he gets wind that, can you believe this cowboy, Ronald Reagan, has called the Soviet Union the evil empire, and he's cheering because at least the President of the United States doesn't buy into the lie that the Soviet Union has been perpetrating for so long. The same with Nelson Mandela in South Africa. What if we had said, look, the apartheid government is the government that we have. Shamefully, a lot of people on the conservative side of the argument made that very point. We have interest. In fact, back then, the conservative case for South Africa is not so different from the case that Roger, now that I think about it, is making for Iran or people like Flint Leverett. This is a reality that isn't going to change. There are great dangers in regime change. We have to deal with the devil we know, so forth and so on. And there were a lot of people who said, no, the man on Robben Island is the man who counts. Well, the people in Evin prison are the people who count. And it behooves this administration, first of all, to give them names, give them faces, raise them at every opportunity that they can to apply the same kinds of pressures that the West applied following the Helsinki process in the 1970s. That is absolutely crucial. Now, to the Obama administration's credit, particularly Hillary Clinton, she has been taking initiatives to try to open up electronic access for, which has been suppressed by the regime, Twitter. I mean, even I'm too old to sort of figure out what all of these technologies are. But it's essentially the same thing that the West did, by the way, both on the left and the right. In Poland during the Solidarity years, the AFL-CIO provided printing presses for Solidarity so they could circulate Samizdat, the Roman Catholic. I mean, it was this remarkable alliance of everyone from Susan Sontag to John Paul II. The main point is we didn't forget what had happened in Gdansk in 1980. We didn't forsake the Solidarity movement for the political conveniences of rapprochement, détente, or accommodation with a Soviet Union that even in the 80s we saw as implacable and a regime that was never going to go away. I could go on, but actually this is an area where Roger and I are going to agree.
Roger, how can the U.S. government and other governments and civil society more effectively help the democracy movements in Iran?
Well, we've arrived at a pivotal moment in this debate because I agree with Bret. I was on the streets in Tehran for 12 days after the election. I was one of the last Western reporters to leave, and after a while people started saying to me, "Where is Obama?" And I think the president was way too hesitant, not emphatic enough. He got to some much stronger statements, but he didn't get there in time. And my view remains to this day that Iran was on a razor's edge for about 6 days, a week. The authorities were at a loss. They hadn't foreseen this. And I will never forget, on June 15, being out on the streets with 2 to 3 million Iranians who had risen up to reclaim their votes. Every single person, myself included, who went down to the avenue between Enqilab and Azadi, between revolution and freedom, on that broad avenue that stretches for about 5 or 6 miles. Everybody went down there with fear in their hearts. And everybody who came out onto that avenue thought to themselves, "My God, this is actually happening." And you climbed up wherever you could to try and get a view of the crowd. There was no end to it, no beginning to it. And I ask myself to this day, if Mousavi had stood there instead, "Here I stand, here I fall, we are now turning on the presidential palace." Because one thing in a crowd that size is that fear simply evaporates. What would have happened? Well, we've been doing a lot of thinking about the hypothetical here today, and the hypothetical doesn't have much use in history because it's what hasn't happened or didn't happen, and that is what I've just described is what didn't happen. But I do believe that the president should be firm in his denunciations of human rights abuses, the attempts to offer filters, technology filters to the Iranian people that enable them to circumvent the clampdown in the digital field. All that is good. I think Bret's, and here we begin to disagree a bit again, his characterization of the Cold War is not exactly accurate. Détente was an important component. If you actually look, as Timothy Garton Ash, for example, has closely at the events of 1989, from the beginning to the fall of the wall, President Bush Sr. effectively, out of prudence, said, you know, we have to wait for this to unfold, not do anything too rash. And in some ways, Iran is like Poland in the 80s today. And as in all areas, and I won't say it's a difference that comes about through age, because maybe we've tired of that metaphor, but you know, sometimes it requires the calibration of two policies. In this case, trying to get some kind of talking going with the regime, support for the Green Movement, rather than just saying, to heck with all that, we're going in, all guns blazing, in support of the democracy movement, and damn the rest. I don't think that's the way to go.
Roger, I have a question that came to us, I believe, from the web, from Andre Schwartz, recalling that you've written about the well-being of the Iranian Jews. And you painted a positive...
I've written about the Iranian Jews.
Yes, you've painted a positive portrayal of the life of Iranian Jews, and I wonder if you still believe that, and what do you see as the future for Iran's Jews?
I said I've written about Iranian Jews rather than the well-being of Iranian Jews, because I chose to write, while I was there, a column about Iran's Jews. I wrote it because I ran into the Iranian Jewish community in Esfahan, which I hadn't expected to do, and I attended a service there in a synagogue. And this was right after the Israeli incursion into Gaza. And as you may recall, there was a great deal of outrage around the world about what was going on in Gaza. Synagogues were being attacked in the suburbs of Paris, in Caracas, in Lyon. There were various anti-Semitic acts going on around the world. And everybody knows where the Jewish community lives in Tehran. Everybody knows where the Jewish community is in Esfahan. The regime, the authorities, Jason, were trying to whip up as much of a frenzy against Israel's actions as it could. Was there a stone thrown during the 3 weeks I was there, as I said, in the immediate aftermath of Gaza, at a Jewish store? Was there a single incident that I could detect anywhere of any kind of attack on the Jewish community of Iran? No. And as you probably know, the Jewish community in Iran, though much reduced, is the largest Jewish community still in the Muslim Middle East, along with Turkey's. Estimates range from 20 to 25,000 Jews still in Iran. And I thought that it was worth raising the question of this question. Here is a man, President Ahmadinejad, making these vile, abhorrent, annihilationist threats to Israel. And if, like Bret, you really believe that this is a maniacally anti-Semitic, absolutely ruthless regime bent on killing as many Jews as possible, as fast as possible, well, why not start right on your doorstep where you have 25,000 of them? And there are red lines. I talked in that piece about the Jewish spying ring that the Iranians had invented 8 years ago. I talked about the persecution of the Baha'i community in Iran. But I said at the same time that the existence of this community should be acknowledged. There are red lines for everybody in Iran. If you organize against the regime, you're going to get into trouble. The red lines are more severe for the Jewish community in Iran than for others. Jews can vote for a Muslim for the Majlis. Majlis can't vote for a Jew. Look, there are all these things, but I felt that this was a reality of Iranian society that was worth taking note of. A lot of people seem to think that was unacceptable. I don't. I think we should look things in the eye. I think in general we should try. We've tried green zones in the Middle East. We built one. We built imaginary worlds. They don't work. In the end, you come back to reality. And this is part of the reality of this multifaceted regime, not monolithic, not totalitarian, as Bret would argue. These nuances count. They may be nuances, but they exist.
Right.
I would not argue that Iran is totalitarian, but leave that aside. You mentioned green zones, and that comes from a column you wrote, Green Zonism, which I thought was a nice expression, constructing imaginary worlds in the Middle East.
Thank you.
Nobody has constructed a more imaginary world in the Middle East than New York Times columnist Roger Cohen, a place in which Iran is a relatively safe haven for its 25,000 Jews. But wait, how many Jews were there in Iran before the revolution? I think there were about 100,000 Jews. So somehow the fact that...
How many Jews were in Egypt, Bret? How many Jews were in Iraq?
Yeah, well, excuse me, but
how many Jews were in Syria?
But the argument you're making is because it isn't Auschwitz, therefore it's an okay place. What I'm simply saying is it might not be Hitler at the moment, but it's the Tsar, and Jews may have some memories of the Tsar. Then, too, by the way, I mean, there was a classic. I mean, that was a very sort of notorious column by you. It got a lot of attention. You know, I was flabbergasted that when you quoted a couple of Iranian Jews, you quoted them by name. Now, I know I'm barely 17 years old, but I've been in the craft of journalism long enough that if you go to a place like Iran or other repressive regimes and you quote someone by name, they're probably not going to give you the lowdown on what's actually happening. They're not going to say this regime is filth, Ahmadinejad is a nightmare. They're probably going to say, you know, so far so good. And there, Roger Cohen, dutifully writing...
So you would have preferred a Jew said?
Right.
A Jew said? That would have been good for you?
No, what I would have preferred is...
A Jew I met...
Wait just a second, Roger.
No, that's not the point. What I would have preferred is not speaking to people who, by virtue of giving their name, indicated that they didn't necessarily mean what it was that they were saying. It is astonishing that you can go to a country where 3 out of 4 Jews have left and say, gee, this is pretty good. Why is it pretty good? Because it's not Egypt during the Nasser era, or it's not Auschwitz. But the Iranian regime is not a stupid regime. They understand the virtues of Potemkin villages and the virtue that the Jews of Iran play in this particular theology of theirs is to say